Welcome everyone, whether this is your first or your fourth time with us for our Think Team Thursday. We're excited that you are with us today. Today is going to be, we're going to be talking about residential college engagement. So we're grateful that you all are here. My name is Kiana Talley. I serve as the Assistant Director for Residence Life at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And you'll see here are our three panelists for today. We will have them introduce themselves in just a few minutes. But before we do that, we just want to talk about some of our ACUHO-I opportunities. So if you would like to continue this conversation after this roundtable, you can always join us in the ACUHO-I online community. We have a general community, and then we also have an academic initiatives online community. We would love for you to continue this conversation after this session is over. You can also look at more resources at ACUHO-I.org, where you'll find a lot of our newsletters and the talking stick, so you can continue your professional development. And then last but not least, we have a plethora of YouTube recordings that are similar to this roundtable, where you can go to come back to this roundtable, or if you wanted to look at some of our other roundtables throughout the year, it is all on our YouTube recordings on our YouTube page. So before we get started with our session, just so you know, you probably got the alert when you first logged on, this session is being recorded and we will upload it to our YouTube page. Please use the chat to introduce yourself. So thank you for those who were able to put in the chat where you're from. The conversation is ongoing. So if there's a question that pops up, we do have questions here that I'll be asking the panelists, but feel free, if something pops up from the conversation that you would like clarity, feel free to put that in the chat. And if you're able, please have your webcam on and your microphone muted. However, that is not an obligation to have your webcam on. But again, please utilize the chat for conversation. And if you do unmute to ask a question, please introduce yourself, say your name, your institution, and then state your question. The last but not least, the moment you all have been waiting for, we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Dr. Stevens.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here this afternoon. I'm Jennifer Stevens, the director of the Residential Colleges Office at UNC Greensboro. We'll be talking a little bit more about what makes each of our residential colleges on our campus distinct, but we have 3 residential colleges at UNCG. I am the director of the administrative office or hub for those residential colleges, and then our residential colleges are uniquely situated underneath our teaching and learning commons at UNC Greensboro. So I direct that office and supervise those full-time faculty and staff that we have associated with our residential colleges.
Hello and welcome. My name is Jamie Penman. I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of Living Learning Programs at Virginia Tech. I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia. And so our office provides leadership and collaboration for 19 different living learning programs, 3 of which are residential colleges. And then we have one building that is, we have incorporated some residential college elements, but it's not what we would define as a residential college. And so in my role, I work directly with the program directors and faculty principals for all of our different communities.
And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shannon Lundeen. I am the Director of Academic Residential Partnerships at Elon University. And we do not have what we would call formally residential colleges, but we have instead 8 residential neighborhoods that are modeled on a residential college. And so we have faculty who live in, we have in any given year, 20 to 24 living learning communities that are located in some of those 8 residential neighborhoods. And our office is really it's a partnership. So I report up through the provost office, but I'm in close partnership and collaboration with our Residence Life staff members and offices and with student life in general. So we have a close collaborative model for overseeing this work, but it really is a joint effort of both student affairs and academic affairs at Elon.
Thank you all for joining us today. I'm actually going to go back to our main logo. But to get started, can you all describe what a residential college is and how is it different from a traditional living learning community or living learning program?
I can offer two definitions that then everybody can contest. So, because Jamie may remember at one point, I don't know, it seems like it was in COVID times, it's probably 48 years ago, but I think it was something like 5 or 6 years ago, we sat around a table and tried to come up with a definition for residential colleges when we were co-founding the Residential College Society. So what we came up with was that a residential college is a collegiate residential environment in which live-in faculty play an integral role in the programmatic experience and leadership of the community. We provided several features that are typically included, but I would say, and I can read those, but I would say that, you know, academic partnerships and some kind of academic support services integration was key. But the thing that became contentious was the live-in faculty part. So there are plenty of residential colleges. UNCG has 3 of them, right, where there are not live-in faculty, but there are faculty who are designated as the main point people over those residential colleges, and they still operate like a separate both housing unit and in some cases at some institutions, a separate academic unit altogether that students have to apply to. So for us in founding the Residential College Society, it was important for us to signal to folks that the live-in faculty part was key only because of who we were trying to bring into the room into our annual meetings, since that seems to be who was absent most, was the faculty who are involved really in a live-in or live-out role in residential colleges. So that's one pseudo definition that I would say is always up for debate. And then for living learning communities, we typically rely on Inglis and Soldner's definition in a 2011 article that they, or chapter actually, that they wrote called Undergraduate Living Learning Programs and Student Outcomes. And they defined LLCs as those that typically group students together in a residence hall, offer a shared academic experience, and provide co-curricular learning activities for student engagement with peers. And so I think the key there is that they're typically smaller and the students are located adjacent to one another. And oftentimes it can be a sub-community of a larger residential learning community that could be considered a residential college, for example. So hopefully that's enough to get us started.
Yeah, you know, as Shannon was talking, I sort of think it, you know, there are those that as far as that would call themselves purist in how they describe a residential college. And, you know, I mean, to me, it's like I go into a restaurant, I ask for sweet tea and they tell me they have unsweetened tea. Okay, it's tea, but I'm probably not going to drink it because I want it sweetened, and no, putting in sugar into cold tea, not the same. But, you know, so it's not to diminish as far as say, you know, my own, all of our residential colleges at Virginia Tech and any future community that we implement that we describe as a residential college will always have a live-in faculty principal. It will always be multi-generational, which we mean is that roughly 40% first year, 30% sophomore, 20% junior, 10% senior. Now, we don't get out the calculator, but the spirit is that the majority of those students are returning students, and that it's interdisciplinary. And so our living learning communities, we have several that are disciplinary based as far as engineering or STEM areas. But for us, we believe that there's just rich learning opportunity available by having a multi-generational and multidisciplinary community.
Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, no, I was going to continue off of that, but I think it leads into your next question for us, which was to describe some more about our residential colleges. So lending itself to this question of definition, I think if you look across the history of residential colleges internationally and in this country, when the residential college was founded at a particular institution seems to influence the definition and the structure and the format. So for the residential colleges at UNCG, we started in 1970. And so that was part of this movement where across higher education, you started to see more centralization of services, roles that faculty had typically had at that time. Certain roles were moved out of the faculty position into other professional staffing positions. And so there was a desire by faculty at UNCG, and you saw this at other residential colleges that popped up around that time, to have space for faculty to continue to have high levels of integrated experience with students inside and outside of the classroom. And so a group of faculty at UNCG started the residential colleges at UNCG, largely like a liberal arts college, a small college within the larger university, where there was a lot of immersive activity between students and faculty. That is the model that it's shifted over time throughout these more than 50 years at UNCG, but we still hold to that like small liberal arts college experience within the larger institution. So all three of our residential colleges are first and second year programs where students get their general education curriculum covered. We do that through a particular curricular focus and a specific pedagogy or methodology in each of the three residential colleges at UNCG. So students who feel compelled to examine the type of content that they would get in general education through contemporary media literacies and social justice, for example, would enroll in Ashby Residential College. And then we have strong residential colleges that focuses on sustainability through hands-on and experiential research. And we've got Grogan Residential College, which focuses on professionalism through team and project-based learning. So students can kind of know what to expect in that sort of academic environment. And because we offer that full slate of courses, we have the faculty, our full-time faculty, and then other associate faculty across campus who come in and teach these courses. They have offices in our buildings. They help facilitate the co-curricular programming. So over the course of these 2 years, students really get to engage with these faculty, some of whom are also a supplementary academic advisor for them. And then they finish with us at the end of 4 semesters taking a research capstone, where they go out and they do their own research, which is supported by faculty in the residential colleges. They present that in undergraduate research conference, and then they publish that in an undergraduate research magazine that we have. So at UNCG, we have 1 live-in faculty member, even though we have 3 residential colleges. So really, it's based on that model of like the faculty are there a lot of the time, but not necessarily living there. But we're very much an academic program that also has co-curricular programming associated with it in the residence halls.
And at Virginia Tech, I talked a little bit about how we define, where the 3 residential colleges we have, they do not, one of them does have an associated course, but the other 2 there's not a course associated. It is all really driven by our live-in faculty as far as the programmatic elements that are part of that experience for students. And so our one that is has an academic component is our leadership and social change residential college. And so actually this used to be the residential learning community. Or residential leadership community, I should say. And it was, so based on students who had an interest in gaining leadership skills, but also learning about leadership. And so it's, in this program, the students, they take 2 different courses as part of that experience, and all of the programmatic elements. There is a consistent theme in exploring sort of the world around you and sort of your responsibility in bringing about social change. And so something unique, I would say, to our university is our first residential college was the Honors Residential College. And it was the first of 2 planned colleges because we were renovating a building of 1,200 beds. I don't know anyone that would build that big of a residence hall anymore, right? We know that it doesn't work to house that many students together and just sort of, tuck them away like that. And so the HRC is roughly 320 beds. We have a wing that sort of connects to the west side of the building, which is 800 beds. So our largest res college is 800 beds. Unique for us is that we knew that that's not good for community. And so we broke it into 4 houses. And so We named those houses. We had students come in and help create an identity for those houses before they were in existence, if you will. So they came up with they're named after 4 trees that are native to Virginia. So hickory, hawthorn, honey locust, and holly. But they identified house colors, developed a house mascot. And this was all before we actually had students living there. But I think it is pretty unique to us that we use that house as a creative way of breaking down the larger building itself. And I would say that you've got other residential colleges out there that probably more closely mirror UNCG, but that they actually are degree granting. So, I mean, it's like your degree is from the blank college at the University of Michigan or Michigan State.
I don't think I need to add much because we've, we've got 8 neighborhoods. Like I said, we have a 2-year live-on requirement. So I think what's noticeably different in the Elon residential campus experience compared to UNCG and Virginia Tech is that this is the experience that all first years and sophomores have, and some returning juniors and seniors who elect to live on campus. We don't have any other style of housing available to them. So in some ways it's all inclusive, but that also means they don't necessarily get to choose what neighborhood they're in. They're not applying to a particular neighborhood. The only way that they could possibly have an edge on that is if they're applying to a particular LLC and that has a fixed location. Otherwise, they are assigned to a room or a suite or a pod or whatever. And then so that kind of buy-in has to come later after they're already here. So that's one challenge that we face. And I'm just going to throw a question out there. We don't have to answer it now because Kiana, we may get to this in the nuts and bolts question of creating a residential college. But Jamie, when you were talking about dividing up the 800 unit portion of the honors residential college into 4 different houses and having the students, create the brand and identity for those places, did you get buy-in from whatever your equivalent would be of like construction, design, planning, right, in order to actually put signage in certain places that would allow, because I'm only asking because we've tried to do something similar and there's pushback from university advancement sometimes because we don't want to take away a potential naming opportunity. So.
Well, that's a really good question. So, as far as signage, there was in our original discussions with the launch of the HRC there were some, they wanted to change the name of the building, which is Ambler Johnston. I mean, being a realist, I was like, I don't think that's going to happen. But what is wonderful and I think beautiful of what happened is that actually Ambler, like outside of my office, is a painting of Ambler Johnston that a graduate student did. And so we really sort of encouraged this embracing of the identity of the building. And so we didn't change the main university waypoint signs that show like East Ambler Johnston, West Ambler Johnston. But what we were able to do is that we have signage that's directly outside the building explaining what's inside of it. And so on one side of the building, it says the Honors Residential Commons. The other says the Residential College at West Ambler Johnston. We also were able to put a plaque in the sidewalk, the entryway to the Residential College at West with the college shield, the coat of arms that was developed for the community, so that as students are coming in and guests, they see that. We incorporated that. There's Ambler Johnston Day that was incorporated for some time where the faculty principal at the time created this story that, just made it up about Ambler Johnston, but that they encouraged students to leave gifts for Ambler Johnston out by the plaque. And so you'd see like a little coffee cup or like a little thing of flowers. Inside of the building, we had a little more control to be able to note the floors. And so what you see is, like a picture of the bear is for Hickory House. And so they had a bare, green sign, bare and hickory. So we had a little more control inside the building on that. But I know, for instance, other universities have really struggled with that very thing that you talked about, as far as this sort of, I know, for instance, at Southern Methodist University, in the implementation of their commons, their creative marketing area developed the coat of arms versus having groups to develop those.
Actually does walk into my next question. If there are universities that are looking to start a residential college, what are some recommendations that you all have to build a solid foundation for that residential college? And what are some challenges that you anticipate that they can be aware of?
I would punt it back to Jamie, only because out of the three of us, he's the one that actually has the direct experience of creating a residential college when there was not one at a large research institution.
I think first, you've got to have a leader that has vision for this and the tenacity to see it through. And so Dr. Frank Shushak, who is our Vice President for Student Affairs, when he came to Virginia Tech as the Associate Vice President for Student Affairs, we were under construction in Ambler Johnson for this renovation. And he asked the question, what if? He came from Baylor University, where they had at that time two res colleges. I hesitate. We were in our renovation play, like I see Jennifer like, oh my gosh, what's he about to say? Part of the renovation plan in Ambler Johnson included a salon where there were tanning beds, nail place where you could get nails done, spray tan booth. And I think he asked the question of, is that what we're here for? Is that what the purpose of a residential experience is? And so my team, as well as our two live-in faculty principals, their offices are where the tanning beds would have been, but never existed. A number of components that were already supposed to be in the building, as far as, sort of a library, a junior common room, those things were already sort of planned in there. So we just tweaked it, but you need a leader with vision. And then you need to gather around you people that buy into that vision. And so we had a group of roughly 15 to 20 people that came together on a Friday afternoon every other week for almost a year. And what happened in that experience was that we formed community. I mean, we formed community among ourselves, and it was faculty and administrators and students. So it wasn't just student affairs staff that said, hey, wouldn't this be cool? Let's put it all together and then let's see if we can find a faculty member somewhere. But from the very beginning, we had faculty and administrators in the same room, and administrators not only from student affairs, but from, in this case, honors, as well as our International Student Center. And so you've got to have a group and you've got to give yourself time to plan. Our living learning community process here, we accept proposals from folks and we're up front. It's an 18-month window for planning. The other thing, and I'll turn this over for other thoughts, is that residential colleges need mission-focused spaces. And so one of the challenges you have, unless you're building new, is you're looking at retrofitting. And so I wouldn't advise someone to say, we're just going to take a residence hall and call it a residential college, and it will include some of these programmatic elements. You do need to have some mission-focused spaces. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the literature on residential colleges, and actually some of the reading I did was from a former faculty member, I believe, that worked at UNCG with the residential college there, that you have a junior common room, which is where the junior members or otherwise known as undergraduates, that it's their space, it's their place to convene. That you have a senior common room, and that's for the senior fellows of the college. So it's faculty, the lead faculty and faculty fellows of the program, that you've got places to gather in community. You don't have to have a dining hall. It's great. Like if you have a dining hall attached to it, it's great, but you can work that in other areas. And so for us, Residential College at Virginia Tech, anyone that we're planning, it's always going to include a space for the undergraduates, a space for the senior fellows. There are going to be faculty offices in there that the faculty principal that their primary office is in the Res College, and that there's an apartment for the faculty member. And I can say this because it's not on my budget, but you don't go cheap. What I mean by that is don't try to take just like, okay, we're going to give them a 1-bedroom apartment. Now, if it's in New York City, yeah, maybe it's a 1-bedroom because that's, that's prime real estate. But as the folks at Vanderbilt discovered, they started with some were 1 bedroom, some were 2 bedrooms, and they found we're having to go back in and to renovate these. And so my own research has shown that most folks, I think that they're doing it right, and that they are treating this is a full-time home for the faculty members. So let's make sure it reflects that.
Yeah, James, even though like UNCG has had these residential colleges for far longer than I have been here, everything that you speak of is true for us in thinking innovatively about ways to adapt. I mean, we've had numerous conversations about the attempts to retrofit our spaces to be more conducive to the types of curricular and co-curricular integration that we want to see furthered in the residential colleges. But oftentimes we find the price tag for that retrofitting is more expensive than if we were to build from the ground up. UNCG didn't have that luxury of building our residential college spaces, even when they first started in 1970. But for us, what we've seen has helped UNCG's residential colleges be successful and have the kind of longevity that it's had has been stability within the faculty ranks. So we've had some of our faculty have moved in and out of different types of roles within the residential colleges, but have been involved with our residential colleges for like 25 years or more. And that type of continuity, especially when we're in residence halls where you can have housing and residence life staff, has a higher turnover than our full-time faculty here. There's the faculty can serve as a linchpin across generations of students. So, if you have a faculty member who's been involved with your residential college for more than a decade, it's a lot of students who have come to associate those individuals with that residential college experience, and they have that connection point. So we have really high alumni engagement in our residential colleges because they know our faculty leadership. They know the types of programming that's happening in the colleges. We have what we call traditions. So some of these programs date back over multiple decades. And so there are certain threads of activity that kind of connect these multiple generations of alumni as well. And that type of multi-generational community that even extends beyond the university campus, I think is something that has helped UNCG's residential colleges be successful.
I'm just going to briefly plug our session at the Academic Initiatives Conference that Jamie and I will be speaking a little bit more in depth about faculty engagement. And we'll be talking about both residential colleges and just living learning programs in general in terms of how to incentivize that and how to sustain it. But, if you are, as Jamie suggested, retrofitting everything to bring faculty into spaces where they weren't before, you're going to be climbing an uphill battle. I know that from direct experience, having been at an institution where there was a longstanding tradition of having college houses with, faculty who were living in to coming to an institution where that was a new thing just in the last 10 years. And we don't have that extra capital to be able to sink into either renovations or in some cases, even new buildings. But I would say the other piece of that, besides the extrinsic, rewards that are, really about like, am I getting free parking? Am I going to get a meal plan? Am I, do I get a stipend? Do I get a course release? How big is my apartment? Am I also going to get storage? I think another question to consider is, how does this align with the promotion and tenure process for faculty members who are doing this work, whether it's a live in or a live out role? And that's why if you're starting from the ground up, the collaboration between academic affairs and student affairs is key to be able to get that input and help start to spread the message that this is something that is a key university priority. So the faculty who are working in these areas, whether it's living learning programs or it's residential colleges, are helping to advance the institution and taking on a significant, whether it's seen as a service leadership role or as part of teaching or a combination of the two. That messaging has to be out. It's ideal if it's out there before the pieces start falling into place and you start recruiting the faculty to do this work.
One other thing that I, really Jennifer and Shannon's comments, it had me thinking of other pieces, and while it's part of the Virginia Tech story with this, I think that it's also a pathway in establishing a res college is that, so Frank Shushak, when he came here, he had this vision of let's do a residential college. But he was very purposeful in how that, he brought a group in to pitch the idea, and it wasn't the group that were decision makers, but it was folks who were situated in specific ways at the university that could be helpful to be a part of it. But then he got the director of honors on board. And then after having a plan in place, now he had been talking to his boss, the director of honors had been talking to his boss, but the provost was a champion for this. Right now at Virginia Tech, our president unequivocally said that, by 2024, we want 67% of our students in a living learning program. And so whether that's a living learning community or a residential college. So getting that support at the upper levels, because as Shannon talked about in regards to when you think about the promotion and tenure process, we want our academic partners to be fully engaged in this. And so it's going to vary in regards to people's a faculty member's fellow department faculty understanding what they're doing over on the other side of campus in a residence hall. But it's really important to have academic leadership support because this really is, it's not a student affairs endeavor. It is this blending of whole life for the student, their intellectual lives and and their life outside of the classroom. My own opinion, my sweet tea version of this is an intellectual endeavor, and we need to have strong support from the academic side of the university.
Thank you all for sharing what has been successful at your universities. To follow up, we know that we have seen a lot of challenges with COVID-19. And with that, what challenges have you seen in your residential colleges? How has this impacted faculty engagement? And has this impacted how students engage and are involved in your residential colleges?
So I'll jump in here that we kept our residential colleges online throughout the whole last year when much of UNCG continued to offer face-to-face courses and programming last year, much more so this year. But last year there was a lot that moved online, and a lot of students who typically would live on campus did not live on campus. And so one of our greatest challenges was we did see a dip in enrollment in our residential colleges last year, seeing that coming up this year, but still not back to pre-COVID levels. But it was difficult to have a residential program where we ended up allowing students to enroll in the residential colleges, whether or not they lived on campus. And so making programming available for students who weren't in the buildings was certainly a challenge. And so we had a lot less face-to-face programming. We all know like Zoom fatigue is real. So the students got tired of so much online programming. And we've seen a real shift this year then when we've put more of our programming back to being face-to-face programming, that the students are coming out at levels that are even higher than they were pre-COVID. So the students are so hungry for that like human interaction and connection that we're seeing lots of attendance at various programs, even trips that we've taken. We've had to, especially in the time of budget cuts, it's been difficult because we've had to go back to looking at our resources because more and more students are wanting to participate in these different programs or go on trips with their residential college than in the past. So I think what we've seen is the RCs can provide a real strong connection to campus and really instill that sense of belonging in ways that students might not get elsewhere. And they're really hungry for that because of their experience over the last year and a half with COVID-19. We've also seen that even in the COVID situation last year, where we had some decrease in participation in our programs, because the academic part of our residential colleges at UNCG really is the connection point by which everything else happens. And our students were still in our classes and engaged with our faculty in that way, that we still saw like student success metrics that far outperformed the rest of the campus, which I thought really spoke to there being something happening in the residential colleges, that if students weren't part of that experience, that they were missing out on that sense of community that really connected them in an academic, personal, social way.
I will just add that I think that every university that has any element of a residential campus where, you know, a certain portion or a majority of students are living on campus suffered in terms of programming. And I don't think that residential colleges are, you know, suffered a fate any worse than just the general, you know, residential undergraduate experience, because, you know, look at how much we do with food and how much we do in large groups. And those are two things that we just couldn't do and that we're still somewhat limited in our capacity to do. But just as Jennifer was saying, our turnout this year is unbelievable. I mean, the students are just like, please give me a marshmallow to put on a stick and let me roast it over a fire. Like they've never had this experience. You know, it's like they're experiencing everything new for the first time. And it's so wonderful to watch. And I would say that I had 4 new faculty out of 10 who live on campus who moved on campus and did this for the first time in their careers in the summer of 2020. And I thought for sure also I was going to get people that were going to say, actually, never mind. I know I accepted this back in November of 2019, but things have changed and I'm not moving my family on campus. But they came. And of course, last year was a very different experience than what they thought they were signing up for, because it was so difficult to get students to come to things and to manage both their own and their residents' sense of anxiety. But this year, the faculty are so excited. They're so energized by the students' excitement about some, the smallest things, like I said, s'mores, right? So I think that one of the things that all higher ed has learned, because I think there was this fear last year that, oh my gosh, the undergraduate residential education model is just going to go out the window. Everybody's going to go to 2-year colleges. Everybody's going to commute, because what we've demonstrated is that we can take the majority of our academic content and put it online, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. And I think what we found very quickly and very clearly is that what students who choose to go to a residential campus for their undergraduate education, what they want the most is that co-curricular learning environment, social environment where they can find themselves, so to speak. They can discover a kind of passion for lifelong learning, something that they cannot get, that cannot be mediated through a screen in a remote learning environment. And so I think we actually demonstrated the relevancy of things like living learning programs in residential colleges through this pandemic, rather than the opposite, which is, I think, what many of us feared.
Yeah, it's interesting in the reflections of folks of last year, and I will take the opportunity to plug a session that I'll be presenting at the upcoming Academic Initiatives Conference about the future of residential colleges in light of COVID. But true to what Jennifer and Shannon said, I think if anything, we've shown we've got the market share, if you will, of the student experience in the sense of what students are really hungering for. And we argue as far as that it is a place that teaches community. If you think of your own life navigating the pandemic, lots of folks were, with extended family, they were modifying their behavior, but they were still connecting. So maybe they were implementing Zoom calls, or maybe they were doing like meeting up outside and setting up chairs and tables outside and eating so that they could come together. Our residential colleges at Virginia Tech made that twist. And so they offered some things via Zoom, but, picnic blankets with the coat of arms are now a thing because they started, basically students got a picnic blanket. And there were cones that would be set up side. So for example, in the HRC, the principal's tea is a weekly tradition where they have a speaker come in. They bought audio speakers, microphone, and picnic blankets, and then set cones up 6 feet apart in the quad for students to pop a squat and to join for tea. Some of the local vendors that we use started doing self-contained sandwiches or those things. So we were able to keep food in a safe way and to be able to make that transition. And so, there were lots of other, we hung light, I would call them twinkle lights, but they're not really twinkle lights because they're like big bulbs, but lights outside in the courtyard of several of the colleges that allowed students to stay outside longer together in community. One of our faculty talked about, it presented a time that we were able to be more present for our students because, we'd be available in office hours, and where before they might come by and say, well, hey, I'm thinking about studying abroad. They would come into that, but then they also were just talking about like, I'm just struggling, like this isn't the experience that I expected. And so, I think if anything, to know and be known, which I think happens in a residential college, not by accident, it takes a whole lot of purpose, but to know and be known in a community gives you that level of support to succeed. Our resident, I think the tally we had was, I think there were literally 1,000 different events that were offered in the residential colleges. And that really paled in comparison to the traditional residential experience. And partly is there's an infrastructure in place for the res colleges to be offering those programs. But the student satisfaction from last year was noted as far as our res college students speaking more highly of that experience.
To stay on the topic of student engagement, are there any unique strategies that you all can think of to develop meaningful student-faculty engagement and relationships?
I feel like this is the awkward conference call. Like when we Jennifer and Shannon might remember this, where you're on a conference call, you couldn't see anyone. And so you kind of pause and wait for someone to jump in. Well, it's still the same thing with Zoom. And so for some things that we built into our experience for res college is, the other thing I forgot to mention of one of the challenges of COVID is that the faculty apartment is such a great location for faculty student engagement because it allows the students to see that the faculty are whole people with real lives, sometimes with kids, sometimes with pets. That was affected because the majority of our faculty had young children. And so understandably concerned about the risk of bringing lots of folks into their apartment pose. And so, but I think the opportunity to, as far as hosting events that are in the faculty apartment, recurring events that are just that the faculty principal is leading, so that it's sort of, it's their show, if you will, fully supported by your live-in hall staff or whoever, but that you're letting them set sort of the tone and direction of that. And then I think, they're just the faculty members' presence at events, not presence with a T, but just their ability to just be there, and it not to be where they're not the sage on the stage. They're just there to engage in community. I love a newsletter that one of our faculty members sends out every week, and she will remind students, she'll say, there's food aplenty and rivers of drink. But I mean, as far as that, she shows a level of just who she is, of like who she is as a person, and that comes out in the communication. But then she's attending events that she's not leading, but she's just there and showing that community is worth it.
I would say one of the things that we found, that I found both when I lived in for 6 years, but then at a different institution, and then here at Elon, is if you have faculty who are living in, or faculty who are in critical live out roles, where they have a responsibility to either a subpopulation or maybe to the whole population of the residential college or community, going to the staff meetings, meaning going to the staff meetings where, if it's a res hall director, community director, whatever, is meeting with the student staff, going there and listening, just listening. There may be a time where, you have the faculty members corner or something, right? Where they can either shoot out some ideas to bounce them off of the students, or they can tell them what's coming up and that they would like their help promoting these events. But just attending the staff meetings helps to build, it goes so far in terms of building rapport, so that the students feel like they are both respected, but that their role as student staff members is better understood by that faculty member, and that their time will be respected. But we know from practice that if the student staff members are not on board with whatever events or programs the faculty member is doing, again, whether it's a live-in or live-out role, they're not going to be pounding down the doors to get their residents to come to these things. But if they're on board with it, and there was some, element of either buy-in, or they have a close relationship now with that faculty member, you better believe that they're going to be the ones who get those residents to attend those events and get them all excited about it. And so, and we know that half the struggle is just getting students to show up. So if we can rely on the student staff members to help their peers show up to those things, then we actually have, much more potential for really meaningful engagement that goes beyond just, a transactional or informational exchange, but can actually develop into a potential mentoring relationship or opportunity, or even networking, right? So it's not always the faculty member who lives in, or who's the head of a living learning community, that is the one that's responsible for being the only academic voice in the room. They also need to be bringing in their colleagues and helping those students make those connections to their colleagues. So.
Yeah, I'll echo what Jamie and Shannon have shared, and say that we have found it helpful when our RAs have come through our residential college programs and understand what that living learning experience is like. Because the students who are in these programs, they can't tell the difference between the programs run by Housing and Residence Life and those run by the residential colleges. It is just their immersive experience. And so it's helpful when we're all speaking the same language, and when the programming that's happening is just the programming that's happening. Our residential, occasionally we have some students in our buildings who are not part of the residential college. But the programming that's happening in the building is all couched under the residential college, and it's open to everybody that's there. And that is just part of what that experience is like. And so faculty and students and staff are equally invested in everything that's happening in the building, regardless of, who officially is putting on the programming.
Jennifer, I just love that because, I think so often we sort of, we get possessive of things that we have responsibility for, and we want, yes, everyone wants recognition, but to me, a student, when they see an event that's being hosted in the Res College, they're not, well, is this coming from Residence Life or is this coming from the faculty member? That's not important to them. And I think sometimes our egos get in the way of like making sure that we're duly recognized. And so I love, that description there as far as that it's like, this is coming from the residential college. And to me, that shows that sort of we talk about a seamless experience. It doesn't matter. They don't need to know that behind the curtain that the faculty member and, say like the hall director, that they're pulling the curtain shut so that the students don't see that there's a gap in the curtain. But I love that you brought that up.
I have one last question before we open it up for our audience to ask any questions. But how have you all assessed student success in your residential colleges? And what tips do you share for assessment in the RCs?
I think there's a number of different strategies, but I would say for people who are just starting out assessing this experience, leaning into your institutional research department to try to figure out, to get a sense of, well, what are the national instruments or surveys that you're participating in? Can you work with them to look at things like, whether it's the NESI or whether it's something like the BESI or, your first college year, whatever that title is. I can't remember I know the acronym. Looking at what you're participating in so that you can see, can you pull out some data that would show a comparison between students in LLCs or students in an RC versus students in other populations? Can you get some baseline for that, right? If you're changing a program, and I know that this will be a pitch for the residential college symposium, we're going to have a few different sessions, concurrent sessions that are going to look at kind of transforming from, an LLC to a residential college, right? If you're doing something that's new or different, of course, you can assess it a homegrown way, but if you can also look at over time, how this may have changed things like any student success metrics, right? So looking at retention and persistence of particular either groups of students, class years of students, whether it's done by racial and ethnic identity or what, I just think starting with IR, if you have no other place to start, starting with IR is going to really help you get a sense of what your university already pays for to participate in and what maybe no one has gone to IR and asked for them to parse out the data so that you can get a good comparison of students who are in other housing arrangements or living off campus versus students who are on campus in these kinds of communities. I know the two of you also have concrete examples that you could probably share.
Well, I think Shannon, your point about working with IR is a good one, because I think we all know that senior level administrators like to see that student success data. And so anytime you can point to that data, I think it's helpful for your programs. We also, because some of what our IR unit has indicated to us is that it's hard to separate out, right? Because these students have these full lived experiences on campus, and sometimes it's hard to differentiate. So we have found it helpful to establish an exit survey for our students once they go through our 2 years in the program, to give us their perception of the impact that the RC experience had for them versus the rest of their university experience. So I shared in this chat with you all the items that we came up with for our program exit survey. And so you all are free to copy that and use any of those items if that sort of information is helpful for you. But it really has given us some very positive data to point to directly from the students about their sense of belonging, about the various academic skills that they have established because from their perception, because of their RC experience, the ways that the RC experience has impacted their leadership in ways that they weren't getting across campus. So we've been able to point to some very specific indicators, at least from the student perception, where they felt like they got something, there was some value added from the RC experience that they weren't getting elsewhere on campus. And then for us as academic programs, a lot of what we start with are these expected student learning outcomes. And so in the same ways that we would develop courses through like backwards curricular design, it's the same for our RC experience. What are the outcomes we want to see for our students? So we have our residential college wide, it cuts across all 3 of our residential colleges, some expected outcomes for students on the academic level, for them as global citizens, how they engage around equity, diversity, inclusion. So we have these outcomes, and then the programs that we develop inside and outside of the class all relates back to those student learning outcomes. And so we measure those as well by having students contribute some things to a portfolio over time. And then we're able to look at student growth and reflection in their portfolios, in addition to the exit surveys and the traditional kinds of student success metrics that we measure.
You know, at Virginia Tech, we look at across our living learning programs, so both res colleges and living learning communities, we actually track retention and GPA data annually based on census. So we basically look at the all first year average, first year students living off campus, first year students not in an LLP, and then LLP students. And that data always shows that they're higher. You know, but we also look at demographic data and how those students are performing. You know, so for instance, you know, we know that mentoring is a powerful experience for undergraduate students, but it is even more powerful when it is for students that are from underserved or underrepresented identities. And so we look at that data as well. One of the things that we do, we looked at student conduct data, and we found that students in our residential colleges were less likely to make poor decisions, if you will. And so we looked at demographic data in regards to what is the race and ethnicity of our residential colleges as compared to the rest of the residential population. What is the what is the distribution of colleges and majors? And what we were finding is that they're more diverse, both in racial, ethnic identities, as well as academic identity. The other thing where we do a sort of a residential experience survey, and so we find that our students in our living learning programs, and particularly our residential colleges, that they just report a more positive experience and greater satisfaction being at the university. And, you know, as educators, I think we struggle with satisfaction being a factor. But to me, what does satisfaction represent, right? It means that you're happy with an experience. And so that doesn't mean you're not learning. It means that you're happy with your learning experience. And so I do think considering those areas that you might be able to work in satisfaction, because that also means you're happy with your overall experience. And we did a quick, we do something called snapshot here, where it's just like a quick couple of questions. And the res colleges always higher scores than the other communities because it's just, I think it's because of how the community is.
Thank you all so much. I'm looking at the time. We are 1 minute over, which is okay. But really quickly, if there is a question, please feel free to put it in the chat and I will send it out to our panelists and I will make sure that we get an answer back for you. So I will give you a couple minutes for that. But also Shannon and Jennifer, if you wanted to share really quickly about the Residential College Symposium before people start to log out.
Do you happen to have the link handy?
I put it in the chat.
Put it in the chat. Okay, great. So we are co-hosting, UNCG and Elon is co-hosting this year's, which is the 8th annual Residential College Symposium. It's going to be virtual this year. It was online last year, but was just a hodgepodge of MS Teams meetings. And this year we have a third-party platform that we're using, and it promises to be much more engaging, and it really will try to simulate an in-person conference as much as possible. So the registration is open as of today, and early bird registration closes at the end of the day on October 15th. So it's $75 for an individual professional or faculty member, $90 after October 15th. And then students, as well as partners of live-in staff or faculty, it's $50, and that doesn't matter if you do it before October 15th or after October 15th. But did you want to say anything about our plenary speakers, Jennifer?
I'll just highlight, we have really diverse perspectives coming in. So we have speakers who come from the faculty ranks and their work with residential colleges. We have those from housing and residence life. We have panels of faculty, staff, and students at both institutions in the United States, as well as a variety of institutions across the world who have various residential colleges models. So there's something here that is for everyone, from students to staff and faculty and academic and student affairs and all of those in between. And so it's a really rich space to come together and hear from a variety of individuals at campuses who do residential colleges all very differently. As you know, Shannon alluded to early on, that we have these various definitions of what the residential colleges look like. And you can get immersed in a space where you can hear from a variety of individuals and perspectives and types of residential colleges, all the way from how do you do that faculty staff engagement with students? How is it that you create residential colleges? How is it that you do this level of assessment, to specific types of programs and some networking opportunities? So we hope that those of you interested in learning more about residential colleges or already active in them will join us for that event.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And also we have our ACUHO-I is hosting the Academic Initiatives Conference on October 6th and 7th. So if you're also interested in that, you may also go to our website, ACUHO-I.org, and you can register there. So thank you all again, panelists, for joining us. Thank you those who came out today. And thank you for those who are going to be watching later on YouTube. But thank you all again. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to ACUHO-I. Have a good day, everybody.